We are live. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and as always, the yang to my yin, Susan Hobson. Susan, how are you?
I'm excellent. I'm super. I'm fired up because we got one of our favorite guests back in studio today. So let's go. Let's get this party started, shall we?
We do, and obviously we have to start off with a quote. And so I have one here from Marcel Proust. And he says, "We don't receive wisdom. We must discover it for ourselves after a journey that no one can take for us or spare us."
Amen. Tell us why you chose that one today, sir.
It's the journey that we need to go on, and our guest, obviously at this point everyone knows Jeff McKeon is back, and the first time he was on with us, he shared his journey, and even we talked about the ROI of great leadership, and it's been one of our top shows.
Yeah.
And so with that, we have our special guest back for round two, the Chief Growth Officer at Neurocapability.
Yeah.
For a minute, I was going to say neuroplasticity. But at Neurocapability, Jeff McKeon's back. Jeff, how are you?
I'm fantastic. I loved our conversation last time, and I couldn't wait to get back on the show and just follow up, because so much has happened in that 12 months, and the world, what an amazing place we live in, and what an amazing time of change. I think what's so exciting, is that we can now see all these things that we've spoken about and the world we envision. You can actually see some of those things taking place now and actually happening.
Before we get into that, obviously, folks, go back into the archives. It was released September 2021. It's called The ROI of Great Leadership with Jeff McKeon. Check that one out. But for folks who haven't listened to that one yet, Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about you?
I'm just an average kind of guy who just went, I've got to do something more, and I've got to lead people so that I can leave behind a legacy. So when you start thinking about a legacy, you start thinking about, well, how do I want people to remember me? Now that is a little selfish, indulgent, right? No! It actually came from Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders, sorry. And he has a chapter in there. It says, stand at your own funeral and imagine what they say at your eulogy. And that has stuck with me. I read that in my 20s, and that passage is probably the only thing I remembered, but I've reread that book numerous times. But when you think about that, we're creating our legacy every single day by everyone we come in contact with at work, in personal life, just in general public. You're creating a legacy. So how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as that grumpy old bloke, or do you want to be remembered as that happy guy? Or, that's for me. That's the choice I make every day. I just want to leave behind a legacy that you can choose, no matter what happens in life, the adversities of life. That's just how you learn the lessons. Life is not easy. It's not tough. I'm an optimist. That doesn't shield me from the bad stuff happening. It's just my choice how I learn that lesson and what I do with that lesson. Yeah. So
and what mission? Help our audience plug into the mission that you're on in terms of the legacy that you want to leave behind and the impact you're having on your mission.
Well, that's everything I do is it's mission centric. Everything I do is about.
That's why I'm asking.
How do I, and I said this in the show last night, the barista, it's a simple thing. They wear a name tag not because they've got Alzheimer's. They know their name, but how many people say their name back to them? Even when they ask, what's your name? You always reply with, and what's your name? Like, if they don't have a name badge on. And it's a beautiful conversation that you can start. And if you start your morning thinking about that interaction, we are human beings. We're not robots. The deep dive is so many people, though, go through life in a threat response
Mm-hmm.
Status. And that's the biggest thing. Our society is very much about what's wrong and what's bad, and instantly you can find out all the worst news in the world, and that's then increasing our threat response. And that's the biggest thing with a world that is instantly connected. Is it's all of that is creating people in a constant state of threat response. Yeah.
So how do we get out of that cycle, Jeff?
Threat response is about awareness. So we talked last time about the pace of awareness, and I think the change is happening because we're seeing it in our educators. It is being taught in schools. There are certain schools around the world that are teaching it to. I have teenagers, and my teenagers are being taught that at our school.
Oh, wonderful.
We missed out. Our generation missed out. The older leaders missed out. The emerging leaders, though, they're in this language, emotional granularity, the ability to label your emotions and name it to tame it. If you're not aware of your own emotions, how can you then express to someone else what you're feeling? And there was research in Brene Brown's book in Atlas of the Heart. There was 500,000 data points, and there were only angry, happy, or sad was the most common feelings that people could talk about. But our emotions are so much bigger than that, but we're not given the language. So we're now seeing that change, that the people are being given the language. The next generations are being given that language. There's a lot of pushback and I disagree with the concept about generations of saying, it's the generation, they don't work, they don't this, they want that. No, they've got language that's older leaders don't understand. And so they're now coming to it from a place of, no, they're really in touch with their emotions. Is your industry or your business able to adapt? It's not the other way around. It used to be you're a business and everyone had to fit into your square box. But the connected world we live in, that doesn't exist anymore. The businesses have to adapt, or they no longer become an employer of choice, and we're seeing that happen around the world.
So you mentioned that since you were last in our studio, September of 21, we were talking very aspirationally about the changes that we wanted to see in big business, where all this human-centric leadership stuff was concerned. But you said you were really excited about some of the changes that had occurred since then. I'd love for you to share some of that with our audience too. What are you most excited about?
So one of the things that we're watching here in Australia, and it's happening around the world, but there was the ISO standard 45003. What does that mean? Psychosocial safety in the workplace. That is an international standard saying, as an employer, you are now responsible for your employees and their psychosocial safety, so their well-being at work.
Wow.
And you go, okay, what does that mean? Well, in most cases, sadly, that'll just be a compliance tick box.
Yeah.
Right? The businesses that are not in the right place will just go, something else we've got to do because someone else wants it. So they'll just do it purely as a compliance process. However, the businesses that truly understand it go, oh my God, this is what we're about. This is how, and inspiring leadership. So when you have a framework created that is installed at a government level and it starts filtering down into business and general business, that's when you see change. Here in Australia, we've taken it one step further where it's being legislated around the country in the individual states into our workplace health and safety standards and law. So that stops it being a grey area. So here in Queensland, where I live in Australia, the 1st of April 2023, the psychosocial safety standards will be installed as law. You will then be responsible for the well-being of your employee, not just physically, but mentally.
Wow.
And that's an absolute game changer for our country and for other countries around the world that are doing it, because it's saying, as an employee, you are responsible for the mental well-being of your employee. You can no longer say, don't take it personal, it's only business.
How do they
personal in business?
How do they measure that and hold those companies accountable to those standards?
So that will be, so the framework set by the ISO standard is a framework that's set, which has all the check boxes. So all the check boxes will be there and companies will comply based on the pieces of paper. The change in culture will happen the first time a business is held accountable for the damage done. And that will be the precedent. And so once that precedent, so the first person to put their hand up and say, you've done me wrong, you have not protected my well-being mentally at work, I am going to take you to court. Once that happens, that will be the ignition moment of absolute change, because an employer who is not doing it will suddenly go, oh my God, they're taking us to court. So it's like the carrot and the stick. Like some people will do the right thing. Some people still need the stick.
Yeah.
But it's because it's a framework and a robust framework that as an international standard, but then here in Australia, it's being integrated into state law.
Wow.
So it will still take some time. However, what that's going to do for an employee is know that like we try and outlaw bullying, we try and do that. But if that comes from a management process and it's not taken care of, that management is responsible. Not necessarily the bully. Previously, it was the bully was held responsible. The difference is now the management process and the bully is held responsible. And that's the shift. It's the actual organisation themselves is responsible, not just the individuals.
There's going to be a lot of lawsuits coming out.
Well, once it's into place, and that's suddenly there's it's not a feel good, touchy feely. Oh, it's not, like I said last time. It's not free bean bags and lunches or free lunches and bean bags.
Yeah.
Psychological safety is not about that. It is feeling safe to go to work. Now. And I read a quote, and I wrote this down because this is what we talk about, and it's probably resonated the most with me, and I've referenced it a number of times on LinkedIn because it just is so powerful. Your business's culture or your company culture is how your employees' hearts and stomachs feel on Sunday night as they think about work on a Monday morning.
So true. Where statistically, that's the highest incidence of heart attacks, at least here in North America, because of people's associations on a Sunday night. They call it the Sunday scaries over here in North America, right?
So we start worrying. Like if you work in an environment that's toxic and it's not a good environment, you start thinking and worrying about that on a Sunday night. Whereas if you're in a company that you love to go to work with, Sunday night, you go, oh, what are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing Monday morning? Two totally different things. Now, in that culture, going forward here in Australia, if that culture is caused by mismanagement and abusive management and power filtering down through the channels to the employees, that management is responsible by law.
I love this.
Now, that will be messy in the beginning. But that's when we talked about the catalyst of change. All of these things are moving towards how do we improve psychological safety? Well, first of all, we've got to have a process that's robust to make sure it's installed so then it can be measured and people can be held accountable. So the tools are here, they're coming. That's the big change we've seen. Yeah.
Do you foresee that spreading over here to North America anytime soon?
Certain countries will take that on board. I do not believe that the American business model will get there. Sadly, it is. We've used it as various different case studies. We have standards here in Australia. We have cost of living standards. We have free healthcare. We have free healthcare. It still staggers me that you're not protected in America for that.
Canadians do. We have free health
Canadians
care.
do. Yes. No, I know.
Yeah.
I'm understanding where our audience is, and I don't want to all of it, because we're in Canada. You're in Canada, we're in Australia, and go, oh, how good are we?
Yeah.
But
yeah,
it shows that there's this massive gap.
I agree with you.
Between and it's literally between the haves and the have-nots. They talk about the home of the free, but no. Only if you're in a position of power or have money, which sadly comes at the expense of low-paid workers. So
so sad.
The changes coming. So there's some research that's come out recently, and it got used as a return calculator, like a return on investment calculator, which has been able to project just a 1% change in the mental health of employees, an improvement, generates so much in cost saving for our free healthcare system, but productivity increases. So
absolutely,
the company that focuses on the well-being of their staff saves our country healthcare costs, but increases the productivity of their entire company and the families of those people, because they're looking after those people. When you talk about legacy, the greatest bit of advice I was able to give someone as a senior level leader when I was coaching was to say, go and find Barry, whoever the guy is in the workshop, the guy out the back in the warehouse. Go and have dinner with Barry and his wife and kids and find out how important his job is to that family. And never forget that family, because that's who you're feeding. That's who you're educating. That's who you're raising because of the job you provide. And sometimes the C-suite can fall out of touch of the reality of the people they employ. There's a whole ecosystem around that one employee and the impact that has. So if we talk about leading with empathy, go and have that dinner or a lunch. Just sit down and talk to them. We're human beings. There's no position in this world, there's no place, no status, no amount of money that should stop you being kind. But sadly, it gets lost.
And it has to be legislated. Right.
We got to
it's wild, but it's also like I've talked to Susan, I've talked to you about this before, right? Is like I talk a lot about mental health, and I've always said Australia is 5 years ahead of us in Canada, and we're 5 years ahead of the US. And
I reckon 10 years ahead, and we're still trying to catch up with New Zealand, just so you know.
Yeah.
Oh, what's happening over there in this space? What makes you say that?
So they were first to allow same-sex marriage. They were ahead of Australia. They have a very empowered leader, Jacinta Ardern. Their leader is just so understanding of power comes compassion. Power is not this absolute thing about being in control. No, it's about having absolute compassion and showing that at the worst times of society and being compassionate in that moment. And she's just been a beacon for that. And they've got a lot of systemic problems in regards to cultural heritage and alcoholism and violence within families. And that's where they're trying to make massive changes. But some of their other things, they're really, really well ahead of Australia. So yeah, we tend to forget about how we do things here in Australia, and we think, we haven't got it. No, actually, we're doing okay.
Well, let me drop a stat on you, Jeff, about when you mentioned that caring about our people's well-being, makes us money, but also makes everyone better. Is in the United States, this was a study out of Stanford and Harvard Business School, was 5 to 8% of their healthcare costs every year is due to how companies manage their people. and 120,000 deaths a year.
Yeah.
That makes it the sixth leading cause
Acceptable.
of death in the United States.
Yeah.
That just gives me the chills.
Well, and then there's the so I've pondered this, and from a financial point of view, you can understand it. But when they have insurance policies on their senior leaders, they take out life insurance policies to pay the company in case they die, not the families. So they insure their and there's a particular term for it that I can't remember, a key person of influence or something, key person insurance or something like that. But they insure them so that if something happens, which, that from a fiscal point of view, that's a really responsible thing for your business. But it's purely only to pay the company. But what about if the company causes the stress that kills the person?
Oh, gosh.
We don't talk about that.
No. As long as we get the insurance. And large organizations then measure, and this is the frightening part, they measure the death rates of each state and the country and benchmark that for budgeting purposes.
Mm-hmm.
The death rate of their senior management. Like, that's too far. That's putting imagine just putting a tiny amount of that insurance money into prevention. And there's a lot of language at the moment, and particularly on LinkedIn, which has been really powerful, is about we need to stop treating things with Band-Aids and go to the source and go upstream and treat the problem. So that's where we go back to that ISO standard 45003. That's upstream.
Mm-hmm.
Having a mental health day is a great start. Don't get me wrong. Like we having it to be able to say, I'm not feeling it, I'm not doing today. And working for somewhere, I work for a brain-friendly organization. We perfectly understand that. And it's like, you do you for the day. Yeah. And look after yourself and come back. So in evolved organizations, that's perfect. The companies that are just starting to get to that, they still have so far to go because they still can't even understand that they're the ones causing the burnout. It's their business model and structure. My wife's a nurse. Nurses have been under so much. I mean, they always have been, but during the pandemic and the flow-on effects, the stress level and that's why they've lost so many nurses and doctors out of the industry because you are tasked to provide the ultimate care. However, most organizations and most hospitals are really poor at looking after the staff. And so staff are working ridiculous hours, they're understaffed, they're under-resourced in a really terrible time, but the care is not there for the employees. My wife's a nurse, and her concept when it came to the COVID vaccination was just, here's a piece of paper on the door. Oh, you've got to go and organise it yourself. Like, their job is to care for people, but when it comes to the vaccine, that's up to you. That's prevention.
Why is that such a blind spot in a space that claims to be experts and specialists in caring for our health?
Well, because it's driven by money.
Yeah.
And even so slightly different. So here in Australia, a lot of our private healthcare providers are church-based. And they still have the same issue. Which just to me is like, hang on a sec, isn't that all? They started about care and compassion, but then it became about money and efficiency.
But that's what we're saying. There is a saying in the wellness space, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is what we say in this space. So it's like, it's so fascinating to us because even when you look at the business case for this stuff, what did we say last time when you were on the show is the ROI for making that little bit of upstream investment in the prevention?
Yeah, well, there's the calculator that can show you spending $1 in
It's 3 to 1 or
minim-
something.
Yeah, it was
4 to
about
1.
2.3 return on investment for every dollar you spend.
That's
But
right.
depending on the industry, and like,
Yeah.
you know, Rob came from heavy industry.
Yeah.
Heavy industry could be 10 to 15 times.
Wow.
So for every dollar you spend, your return on investment is huge because of it's preventing lost downtime and a whole range of things.
Mhm.
This is the space and the world that this ISO standard has brought in, that it is now going to change business culture because there's now a solid framework which is being legislated. That will make Australia a employer of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So when because it's electronic, like it's also the electronic space, and people will say, oh yeah, we want to work with someone in Australia because we know we're protected, or we want to come to Australia because we know we'll be protected as employees. That's a wonderful thing for an entire country going forward if you want to attract
Absolutely
great people to your business or to your country, is that you are providing this level of protection, unlike, you know, many places. There's still a lot more that do better than us, though. So it's okay.
Well, that's what we were talking about aspirationally. And I remember when last time we were on the show, we were saying, oh, this great resignation is going to be just the wake-up call we've been looking for, so that people will actually entertain this business case we're trying to serve them with.
Yes.
Then now, like fast forward a year and a little bit, and now it's all about the quiet quitting. So to some extent, we're still not learning the lesson here. Right?
So there's a really good frame about quiet quitting. That's not quiet quitting. It's just disengagement.
Yeah, I know.
Like we've come up with another term to move the problem into some. Oh no, well, so it's gone from low engagement score to oh no, it's this quiet quitting.
Yeah.
It's the same, almost swore them.
When I read the definition, I was like, my dad did this in the 90s.
Yeah, government employees have been doing it for generations. They just turn up to work, take their paycheck, and they don't care because they're not engaged in the work.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the quiet quitting is a generation of people saying, if you don't engage with us and make us want to come to work, we're just going to turn up and we're going to do what. So I've always worked, and okay, here you go. If you talk about quiet quitting, I've always worked in industries where it was expected that you turned up before your start time and you stayed back after your start time. But I had to fill out pay sheets that said I worked 38 hours because I was a commission-based salesman, and they said that's the world. If you're paid commission, you just do the hours. And all my career, I fought against that and said, no. If I turn up, you need to pay me those hours. The commission is on top of. No. Now, in the world we live in now, they can't get people to work. Like no one will approach
overtime without pay. Yeah.
Well, no, yeah, it's like no, unless you pay us. And they won't even apply to the job ads.
Yeah. That's the thing. Is like now it's like a talent war, right? And you just can't compete for that talent if that's what you're listing on your job posting.
Yeah.
What I was referring to, and we were talking about this, I think, on our last show with Bonnie, McKinsey came up with this report saying like 40% of the workforce is planning on quitting their job in the next, 3 to 6 months, Rob?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I mean. We're calling it different things. We're dressing it up in a different outfit, but like the problem is persisting. And that's the question I have for you, right? Is like, why are we still seeing that number so high a year and a little bit after we last spoke?
So if there was, so I love what we've had is data. This is what's really good now is this is all backed up. The last couple of years, it's gone from being, this would be nice to have touchy-feely, all of that stuff to now, okay, here's the hard data. So McKinsey's done some great data. MIT Sloan, Donald Sull released work saying that it was 10 times higher to leave a toxic employee. The toxic environment was 10 times stronger than what they were paid.
That's right. Yeah. We had Charlie
So-
on the show actually to talk about it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, I missed that because I heard he was on Brene Brown. That's where I listened to him. That's so like that's got to be an alarm bell. What you've got though is you've got this top tier generation that are immune to the needs of the everyday employee because they've been in the C-suite or senior management for a long period of time. So CEO's disease is the wrong thing, but it's an upper echelon who are immune to the feelings of the people they work for.
Yeah.
Now, they will move out or be replaced over time because they're no longer an employee of choice. So that's what's happening right now. This employee of choice, unless you're attracting the right staff, they've got to look at senior management now and go, guys, you're missing the point. We can't attract people because the people are telling us this is what we want, this is what it needs to be, and our business model is not there. We need to change our business model, otherwise we're going to be left behind. So now you have an uprising of the staff and the employees saying it's not good enough. And that's the massive shift. And I think the catalyst of the pandemic, and then we keep talking about the great resignation. Well, no, now this is people voting with their jobs. Yeah. This is not a democracy. This is an uprising of people who are saying, enough's enough, guys. We are not, it's really disheartening to watch the way they try and still get a young generation to put up with terrible conditions because their business model says we've got to employ them for nothing, we've got to give them nothing, and we've just got to churn through them. And that's business models. That's how they're designed. Yeah. So until that mindset is changed, and like all change. So something we were reflecting on about business, there are big periods of upheaval and change. 80s was the greed, and then the crashes came. If you go back, if you talk about the baby boomers, after World War II, terrible times trying to recreate industry, recreate strength and society. But they talk about how this was this massive uplift of society. Guess what we're in now? So in 20 years' time, we will look back at this being this period of catalyst of change where the capitalist model is being challenged by the people who work within it. So not by an external force, it's actually the people within it going, hey, look, guys, no more. We've had enough. Unless you do this, we're not gonna work for you. And that's what's happening. There's always a resistance to change. So there has to be some form of friction. We've created worldwide friction.
Woohoo!
Any change manager will look at a curve of change, and there has to be a point to break your pathways. And so the more people say there's the great resignation, guess what? The more people who join in. Because they suddenly go, oh, someone else is talking about this. Oh, I'm not happy what I'm doing. I need to change. Strength
in numbers.
Yeah.
Herd mentality.
Yeah. And you go back to that culture is the hearts and minds, the hearts and stomachs of your employees on a Sunday night, thinking about Monday morning. Now imagine as an evolved business, that was your KPI. How everyone would want to work for you. Remember, it's not about free lunches and free beanbags. And you've had Kim Scott on your podcast, Radical Candor. Psychological safety is not all hugs and kisses and everything's lovely. No, it's about having tough conversations.
Hard conversations.
But being safe in your space to express your views, to be seen and heard. That's the world we're living in now. It's no longer command and control. It's about trust and inspire. Not my words. Stephen M.R. Covey, those words. Yeah.
And it's paired beautifully with the psychedelic renaissance that's coming around again. So it all fits together. And I got another great stat for you, Jeff, just because we're going to throw these out here. So that this study out of Workforce Institute found that, what was it? It's 2/3 of employees said they'd switch jobs right now if they could, and nearly half don't ever want to work at all anymore.
I can see that.
Yeah.
That just tells us right there where we're at in our life cycle, and hopefully, we will see that change, because even Susan and I were doing just some back of the envelope calculations the other day, and we said even if you just look at turnover and absenteeism, presenteeism, don't even worry about increased productivity or well-being or all the other stuff.
Yeah.
You get like 400% ROI in the first year alone.
Yeah. But that's not being taught to the people who are actually in charge. That's the problem. Now, you used a great word there, presenteeism.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that
Quiet quitting? Yeah, it's the same thing. That's what I mean.
Basically.
You dressed it up in a different outfit. I know.
Come up with a new hat to put it under, but it's exactly the same thing, and it's always been there.
Yeah.
And it can be measured. And if you can measure it, can't you manage it? But so many, like, I'll give you an idea of a company I came across that they did one annual survey in a 12-month period, and they based their decisions on that annual survey. Like, that was it. One survey.
Well, it's
phoning it in.
It's like your annual performance review.
Yeah, exactly. No, that annual performance review and then staff engagement was done afterwards. And so a whole year to gather data that's no longer relevant because it's so out of touch with the reality of the people in the workplace. Like,
But that's what leads to disengagement, is that level of disengagement from phoning it in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just going through those motions.
And I heard a story of the management. This blows your mind. The management standing beside the employee while they filled out a staff engagement survey.
Oh my God, Nash.
That's some good psych safety right there.
Yeah. So the team leader would stand beside them while they filled it out to make sure it was done in lines with what the expectation was.
Of course. That's an intimidation tactic.
Anyway, so that's where we talk about there's such a gap between those who have and those who don't. But what's happening now is if you've got psychological safety, which psychological safety is within teams, it's not an organization.
Absolutely.
Actually, you guys live and breathe this. It's very much within the teams. You can have a toxic employer, but high psych safety within individual teams, because it's about that team, which, as human beings, we're tribe animals. So if we connect, that's probably that's the most important thing. But it's the difference between the haves and the have nots. If you do not have psychological safety or a process in your business, you will not be an employee of choice. That's what all this is about. That's what the pandemic, that's what the great resignation, quiet quitting, whatever terms you want to come up with, it's telling you as a business, if you are not changing and adapting, you are going to be left behind.
Amen. That's why we brought you back in here, because we needed your help reinforcing this case that we've been trying to make this year. I have to ask, while you're in studio, any good books you come across this year since we last saw you that you're really fired up and excited about? I knew there must be.
I live and breathe books.
That's why I asked.
Behind and it's what I do, and I tried to narrow it down to 3, and that was really challenging.
I bet.
But and I'm going to show it just because we're on screen, but not everyone else is. So I mentioned before, Trust and Inspire by Stephen M.R. Covey. Yep. That is what we're talking about. So he's provided a framework for business to look at it as, rather than command and control, which is the old model, it's moving to trust and inspire. If you trust your employees, you inspire them. That's return on investment sorted, because you're doing all that stuff to take them. You're leading them, not managing them. People come to work to be led. They don't come to work to be managed. So that's the big one. Why has nobody told me this? Dr. Julie Smith. She's awesome. And I came across that because of my teenage daughter. Because Julie Smith is really strong on Instagram. And so I started reading her work. And she started on TikTok and Instagram doing 1 minute basic psychology self-help for teenagers, because they were crying out for it in the pandemic. And so she's a clinical psychologist, but now she's on social media and she just does these 1-minute videos, but they are so visually easy for anyone to understand the message. She spends a lot of time making sure it's attached with a visual as opposed to her just talking. The colors are bright, everything's, because 65% of us are visual learners. And if you're on a platform that's visual, well, then that's where it comes from. So that was, that book was great because it's just fundamentals of psychology, but we're not taught that.
But that really that backs up the case in terms of how this generation is different. They're more in tune to what they're feeling emotionally. They're learning about their mental health. They're on Instagram learning about their mental health, right? So even just that is a good example in terms of the foresight that we're saying. Like this,
and we know that once they go through a period of in the workforce, they will be the trust and inspire leaders of the future. Because they know what they want, how they want to be led. So they're going to become those people. It just takes time. Like, any generation comes in, they have to do an apprenticeship. Doesn't matter what it is. And that takes time to learn the skills to lead. People it's very rare that someone is born a leader. No, there's been a lot of work that allows them to get there. And then the final
Boss Baby would disagree with you. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's a good.
What happened to you? Bruce D. Perry and Oprah Winfrey.
And Oprah Winfrey. So this is combining neuroscience and trauma, so adverse childhood experiences, and how that in the first 5 to 7 years maps your brain and impacts the growth and development of your brain. Adverse childhood experiences impacts so many people. It is not just trauma that we would say, it's trauma. No, it is whether or not you're seen or heard. It's how you learn right or wrong, love, hate, all of those things. So you could be brought up in a nice family, mum, dad, everyone at home, but if you're not seen as a child, that creates that expression of who you are and what you have to do to be seen. So kids can either misbehave or they've got to be high achievers, so they're seeking approval, or it could be the really tragic, terrible stuff. But how that impacts the brain from a neuroscience point of view, but also what can be done to actually reverse that. But it's like all awareness. Everything starts from awareness. So, and it's that great question. Stop asking people, what's wrong with you? What happened to you? What's that about? What happened to you?
What's your story?
Yeah, tell me your story. And that's from an empathy point of view. I had someone say, you don't need to do that at the workplace. I went, you're a human being. You can do that anywhere. It's got nothing to do whether it's the workplace or not. Just be a human being and have empathy. And when it comes to empathy, I love the difference between empathy, sympathy, compassion, and it was Brene Brown's way of displaying it. But a friend of mine said it beautifully is, I have friends who are prepared to lie down in the mud with me and help me get up when I'm ready. Now that's empathy. Compassion is doing that for a complete stranger. And it was just such a great thing because she went through some pretty dark times in her life, and her friends were there for her, and that was the way she described it. They laid in the mud with me and helped me get up when I was ready. And it's like, that's, if you ever wanted a definition, that's it. That's perfect. Yeah.
Love it.
It's actually also Brene Brown has it's an animated video on YouTube you can watch that walks folks through those differences. And I also agree that trauma is the most misunderstood thing out there. And everyone listening, if you go, I believe it's wisdomoftrauma.com, but if you Google it, Dr. Gabor Mate has a documentary on it. It's about an hour long. It's by donation, so you can watch it for free or you can give them some money for it. Totally check it out. He's very much a thought leader in trauma. Yes, in the realm of hungry ghosts.
There it is. Yeah.
Is one of his books Jeff's just showing us. He's incredible. And he actually one of his statements that he talks about is addicts are the most honest people in the world because they feel their pain, they know they have it, and then they go out and they're just honest about, I am taking this drug to make me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Where the rest of us bury it in work and Amazon and whatever else
Netflix.
we do.
And there was a great quote recently, and capitalism capitalism used the addiction to work as a way to hide what's truly wrong.
Yep.
So people became addicted to working hard, working longer, working more. Well, really, why?
Busyness as avoidance.
Yeah, very much so. And in reality, and this goes back to that Stephen Covey 7 Habits. Are the people? Is the company you work for? Are they going to turn up at your funeral? Who's going to miss you?
Yeah.
Who's going to be there to support your family in the time of needs?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the company. It might be some of the people that you've made lifelong friends, and socializing at work is one of the great things at work. So you may find your best friends at work, but the company itself is not going to be at your funeral or care for your family afterwards. That is so rare. Now, if there are companies out there, please let us know that you have a process around that. That would be beautiful. But the reality is that you go to work to provide for your family or your friendship or whatever you need to do. We don't exist to work. Even the work I do, which I'm deeply passionate about because I get to read for a living, it's great, and write stuff, right? So that's part of my job model. But I'm deeply passionate about it. I love it. But I'm here for my family. Mm-hmm. Everything's driven by family. I've written this a number of times on LinkedIn, but I now measure my success based on the number of hours I spend with my teenagers because it's finite. Work and money are always available.
Wow, that's game changer, even just that. Jeff, what do you want to share with our audience in terms of how we want them to lead going into a new year here? We're almost at 2023, certainly by the time this hits the airwaves. So what would you like to tell our leaders out there? What's your call to action?
The big thing is stop and think about what is the one thing you can do today that impacts the lag measure down the track. Most people are looking at the results, wondering how they change the results. No, go back. What's the thing you can do today? What's that one thing you can... it might be that one person in your business you walk past and you say hello to, good morning to. That in itself, if you just made that your key focus every day, the return on investment over here and the profitability and the turnover of not turnover of staff, the turnover of income would go up purely because you're talking and acknowledging human beings. We are tribal animals. We want to be part of a tribe. It is in our DNA. It is in our brains are socialized. So if you understand that, the minute you recede, whether you're a leader or as a person, you're not fulfilling your capacity and you're not thriving.
Oh, that's good. Oof.
And the other big thing is a brain, and our brains, social brains, we cannot learn if we are in threat response. Your brain, if you're in a threat response, work or school or life or whatever it is, if you're in that response state, it shuts down the activation of your prefrontal cortex, the front of your brain. No one's going to learn anything if you're in that state. And I believe there's a lot of change policies and processes that just do not understand that if you force change on people, you are creating a state of threat response. And you have to understand that if you want to make change to anything.
Ooh, mic drop.
I love that. And you just, when you said the one thing, that's another great book out there for folks.
That's in there. Yeah, the one thing. Yeah, that's in there too. Yeah.
In the library.
Have you noticed it's never just one thing or one book? Yeah.
No.
Alrighty, folks. So, I mean, obviously, for everyone out there, they should check out neurocapability.com.au. And we also dropped Jeff's LinkedIn profile in the podcast notes. So connect with Jeff. He always puts out some great stuff on LinkedIn. Jeff, is there anywhere else you want folks to find you?
Mm-hmm.
No, look, I got given a great bit of advice a number of years ago, and that was just write every day and find a platform that you can write every day, because that develops your writing skills. So LinkedIn for me is where I post things every single day. And sometimes they are neuroscience based. Sometimes they're just reflections. Sometimes they're just a laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that next year I start doing a master's of educational neuroscience. So that's how do we teach people better? And if you're changing people, if you're wanting to change, you need to understand how the brain works. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So always curious, always learning.
I thought you were going to say you're doing dances on TikTok next year.
No, my teenage daughter. No,
She won't allow that.
No, Dad. No.
I love that. Alrighty, folks, for us, obviously, please hit subscribe to the Leadership Launchpad Project on your favorite podcast platform. We're on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. And then obviously for anything leadership development, conflict management, DEI, and more, head on over to elitehighperformance.com. Susan, is there anything you want to leave folks with today?
I'm just so excited about this interview. I'm sitting here as Jeff is riffing, thinking about all the leaders that have come across my path who are not convinced that Leadership 2.0 is coming. And you spoke with such conviction. I can't wait to share this episode with them, because if they didn't believe me then, they certainly are going to believe me now because of the alignment and the conviction in your voice. So I'm so grateful to you, Jeff. Thank you for coming back for round 2. I knew this was going to be a party.
Yay. And I always sign off now, and it's on everything I do. It's always stay awesome and stay kind.
Oh, I love that.
I love it too. And for me, I want to leave people with this. And it's what Jeff mentioned about we cannot learn when we're in threat response. Mm-hmm. And we can also not heal when we're in threat response. And often, yes, our environment, our workplace, and our boss, where they can trigger these feelings that they might not even be aware of. But we need to be able to see ourselves and give ourselves the awareness when we need to step away so we can go on that journey to receive the wisdom we deserve. So give yourself that journey. Jeff, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you so much for spending your time with us, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.